as this live is getting ready here. All right, shalom, everyone. I'm Brother Doug with the Wakened by Yahuwah Assembly in Yahuwah Almighty Yahushua Messiah. I got my mom right here, Sister Sharon. Next to me, we got Brother Dennis, Brother Yahusha, and Sister Marissa. So we are going to be starting off here, continuing our Sabbath Day studies. First Kings chapter 9. So let me just pull that up here. First Kings chapter 9. Try to pull it up for you guys here. So let's do a compare list here. Select versions to compare. I think we'll go with LXXE. And let's just do ESV. Masoretic, just do that. Okay, I'll try to. This font's kind of small, so let me try to expand a bit. There you go. Now you guys should be able to see the screen. Okay. Now we're going to go First Kings 9. All right. Mom, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Okay, when Solomon had finished building the temple of Yahuwah and the royal palace and had achieved all he had desired to do, Yahuwah appeared to him a second time, as he had appeared to him at Gibeon. Yahuwah said to him, I have heard the prayer and plea you have made before me. I have consecrated this temple, which you have built, by putting my name there forever. My eyes and my heart will always be there. As for you, if you walk before me in integrity of heart and uprightness, as David your father did, and do all I command and observe my decrees and laws, I will establish your royal throne over Yashrael forever, as I promised David your father, when I said, you shall never fail to have a man on the throne of Yashrael. But if you, meaning you, plural, my footnote says, but if you or your sons turn away from me and do not observe the commands and decrees I have given you, and go off to serve other mighty ones and worship them, then I will cut off Yashrael from the land I have given them, and I will reject this temple I have consecrated for my name. Yashrael will then become a byword and an object of ridicule among all peoples. And though this temple is now imposing, all who pass by will be appalled and will scoff and say, why has Yahuwah done such a thing to this land and to this temple? People will answer, because they have forsaken Yahuwah, their Eluah, who brought their fathers out of Egypt, and have embraced other mighty ones, worshiping and serving them. That is why Yahuwah brought all this disaster on them. At the end of 20 years, during which Solomon built these two buildings, the temple of Yahuwah and the royal palace, King Solomon gave 20 towns in Galilee to Hiram, king of Tyre, because Hiram had supplied him with all the cedar and pine and gold he wanted. But when Hiram went from Tyre to see the towns that Solomon had given him, he was not pleased with them. What kind of towns are these you have given me, my brother? He asked. And he called them the land of Kabul, which it says sounds like the Hebrew for proof. I'm sorry. Um,
What verse are you at?
um, I'm at the footnote on verse 13, I think it is.
Oh.
12, yeah, 13. Oh my gosh.
These cities which you have given me, brother, he called them boundary until this day. So it seems like the
Oh, good
Septuagint.
for nothing is what my footnote note says. Kabul means Hebrew for good for nothing.
Oh, that's an interesting difference.
Yeah.
Because boundary definitely does not mean good for nothing. So that's kind of an interesting difference there.
Yeah. Okay. So then it goes on to have to this day. Now Hiram had sent to the king 120 talents of gold. I do know that 1 talent is 50 pounds. So 120 talents of gold. Here is the account of the forced labor King Solomon conscripted to build for Yahuwah's temple, his own palace, the supporting terraces, the wall of Jerusalem, and Hazor, Megiddo, and Gazer.
What verse of yours says forced labor?
Okay. Um, all right, that is verse 15. Gosh, it's hard to read these numbers.
Interesting. Because mine says this was the arrangement and provision which King Solomon fetched to build the house of Yahuwah and the house of the king, the wall of Jerusalem, the citadel. It doesn't mention forced labor at all.
Mm.
Yeah.
Was the name Kabul? Like Kabul?
Yeah, it says Kabul.
Yeah, because there's a city in the Middle East called Kabul. Remember they sent all
Yeah.
those that died?
Wow.
Yeah, I wonder where the NIV is getting forced labor from in that verse, unless there's a word for word Bible that actually says that. They might be adding that in there.
Which verse?
Verse 15, my mom said, and hers says forced labor. Trying to see where they would be getting that.
Levy. This is the reason of the levy.
Ah,
It's in the Masoretic.
yeah. Okay, so they added in the levy in there. Okay.
No, it's in there.
Okay. Oh no, I mean the Masoretes added it in there, the levy.
Okay.
Yeah, they must have felt the need to add that in there. I know that at some point he does have forced labor from the all those tribes they didn't utterly wipe out. He has them does do stuff, but I don't think that's in this chapter. Oh no, it is. Okay. Yeah. Okay. The Septuagint does mention in verse 20, my mom hasn't gotten to that yet, but it does mention the tribes that he puts forced labor on or tribute. Um,
What's interesting is that verse 15 is in it's
22.
in the LXX, but it's missing in the Charles Thompson.
I think the Charles Thompson might have it in verse 22 or 10 verse 22, I think. Because I'm
Huh.
noticing my LXXE on the Word software has a parentheses. It says 10 verse 22. So check to see if it's in the last verse of or the end of chapter 10. It might be in chapter 10.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the chapter numberings I've noticed are different from translator to translator. So that happens a lot. The LXX though is missing a bunch of verses at the end here. There's like a good
Yeah, it's
three,
in
4 verses.
Charles Thompson and 1022. Different chapters.
Okay.
Really weird.
There seems like either the Masoretic added a lot of these other verses or something happened with the LXX here because you got four. 4 verses here are not there. 21's missing as well. 23, 25. So I wonder if there was a fragmented problem with this chapter when they found the LXX, or what happened. I wonder what is the importance of those verses. Let me see here. Oh, okay, yeah. I think this is a reiterated story, is what it is. Yeah, okay. This talks about burning the Canaanites and all that, and giving it as a dowry to dowry to his daughter, Solomon's wife. Yeah, I think this is mentioned in the LXX in a different chapter. Yeah, so that I think that could be why the LXX doesn't have it there. It was it's mentioned. It seems to be mentioned in Judges 129. And
It wouldn't be mentioned in Judges 129 because Solomon
Okay.
wasn't alive in Judges.
Okay,
That's right.
I don't know why they cite that then. Okay. They cite First Kings 9:24 as well, so I wonder if it's reiterated in the same chapter. Yeah, aha. See, this is what I mean with the Masorites. Why are you putting the same event twice in the same chapter? This does not make sense. But Pharaoh's daughter went up to the city of David to her own. Oh, okay, never mind. I jumped to the conclusion there. But it seems like this story, I've seen this story before in Kings. I've seen it before. I think this is a reiteration of that event where Yahuwah uses this Pharaoh to destroy these cities. Try to remember, yeah, to kill the Canaanites. So I think this is in another chapter in the LXX. I would have to look back into it, but I think it's either a chapter or two before this that it's mentioned. So it seems like this keeps getting reiterated, this story. Anyway, sorry, Mom.
Yeah, that's okay.
You were at what, verse
Okay.
15?
I believe
14,
so.
15? Okay.
Okay. Here is the account, the forced labor King Solomon scripted to build Yahuwah's temple, his palace, the supporting terraces, the wall of Jerusalem, and Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer. Pharaoh's king of Egypt had attacked and captured Gezer. He had set it on fire. He killed its Canaanite inhabitants and then gave it as a wedding gift to his daughter, Solomon's wife. And Solomon rebuilt Gezer. He built up Lower Beth Horon, Baalat, and Tadmor, which the footnote says Tabor, in the desert within his land, as well as all his store cities and the towns for his chariots and for his horses, whatever he desired to build in Jerusalem, in Lebanon, and throughout all the territory he ruled. All the people left from the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. These people were not Israelites. That is, their descendants remaining in the land whom the children of Israel could not exterminate. These Solomon conscripted for his slave labor force, as is to this day. But Solomon did not make slaves of any of the Israelites. They were his fighting men, his government officials, his officers, his captains, and the commanders of his chariots and charioteers. They were also the chief officials in charge of Solomon's projects, 550 officials supervising the men who did the work. After Pharaoh's daughter had come up from the city of David to the palace Solomon had built for her, he constructed the supporting terraces. 3 times a year, Solomon sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings on the altar he had built for Yahuwah, burning incense before Yahuwah along with them, and so fulfilled the temple obligations. King Solomon also built ships at Etzion, Geber, which is near Elat in Edom, on the shore of the Red Sea. And Hiram sent his men, sailors who knew the sea, to serve in the fleet with Solomon's men. They sailed to Ophir and brought back 420 talents of gold, which they delivered to King Solomon.
Hey, Mom, can you read verse 22 again?
Yes.
We were talking about this off the topic today.
Okay. 22. But Solomon did not make slaves, of any of the Israelites. They were his fighting men, his government officials, his officers, his captains, and the commanders of his chariots and charioteers. Yeah, that's right.
So we see this is a drop right back to the Torah and what Yahuwah commands. You don't make slaves of your brothers. Okay, you can make slaves of the Canaanites because these people actually, they were supposed to utterly wipe out anyway. Okay, they were not supposed to live. That's why it says in verse 21, these are the descendants of those that were left in the land after them, who the children of Yashrael had not been able to completely wipe out. From these Solomon raised compulsory labor, as it is to this day. So we were, as a group, talking about this whole slavery thing off topic. This is a perfect example of what righteous slavery is in Scripture. It's not for everyone. Not everyone is to be a slave. It's only those pagan nations that Yahuwah told them to what is it called? Dispossess from the land.
Right.
These were original inhabitants of the land of Canaan that they were told to wipe out, dispossess them from the land. Those are the ones he's making slaves. So this is a lot of the anti-slavery in this world. They don't even pay attention to that. Slavery is not equal. The people that were meant to be enslaved were not believers. Okay, people that actually worshipped the Elohim of the mighty one of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were not supposed to be slaves. It's the ones that worship the gods of the nations were supposed to be the slaves. So this is something that's not taught either, is that Yahuwah has specific parameters for slavery. It's not like, just whatever you want to do. You also can't mistreat your slaves either. If you go to the book of Deuteronomy, there's a huge chapter talking about the commandments about slavery. Go ahead, Brother Yahusha.
Let me go back to it. 1 Kings 9:25 is not in the it's not in the Septuagint. It is an interesting verse though, and I'm wondering why it's there. At least in the Masoretic. It talks about 3 times in a year did Solomon offer burnt offerings and peace offerings. I would imagine that would be 3 times a year your men shall appear before me. That talks about in Exodus and then Deuteronomy. But the what is it? Oh, what happened? It says that he's offering up incense upon the altar, and he's offering burnt offerings and peace offerings. I guess you could say that he brought it to the Elohim and they offered it up, but it doesn't seem to be what it's saying. It seems to be saying that he burned incense before Yahweh. Now, is there anywhere that Torah would allow him to burn incense before Yahweh rather than priest?
This would put a bad light on him, actually, this verse here, this added verse here. Because this, according to the Vulgate, it's saying, and the daughter of Pharaoh went up from the city of David to her house, which Solomon had built for her. Then he built up Milos. So it's almost like he's building a house for her to worship her gods. And this is where the idea that a lot of these movies, these Solomon movies, you'll
No, I'm
get
talking
where
about verse 25.
25, okay. That he had built to Yahuwah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how that. I guess in those days there was a lot of mercy being given in those days. That's the only thing I can think. Where Yahuwah's giving him mercy because he's young and he doesn't fully understand these things. It's the only thing I can think of. It is a little bit out of place, and I'm kind of wondering if this was something that was added in because it's very out of character for him to, as a king, to not know he can't offer offerings, not being from the tribe of Levi.
Mm.
So, like, he would be physically going to the incense altar, burning incense. I don't know. I wonder if the Mazarites added that in there to either they wanted to feel like they could promote an idea that the king can offer offerings. Maybe they had a doctrine among themselves that you could offer offerings as a king and all of that, and they were trying to insert that in there. I don't know. It's very weird because if that's the only place that it talks about Solomon doing that, that's a little out of character for him. That's a little weird. And yeah, I don't know. I would have to see a second or third witness to assume that that's correct and that verse is supposed to be there. Because it's not existent in the Septuagint, like Brother Yahusha said. A lot of these verses towards the end are not there. I think it's like from 23 to 25 or something like that. Let me see here how many are missing here. You have 25 missing, 23 missing. 21's not there in the LXX either. So there's a bunch not there. And I'm kind of wondering if this was like something they tried to insert in there to make it look like it's righteous for the king to offer incense, even though he's not from Levi.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't think as a king you can do that. I don't think that would be righteous at all to be doing that. So that doesn't make any sense. Um, yeah, so that's something I definitely want to look more into, and if they had traditions of this in the rabbinical circles, that the king was to act as not just a king but a priest. Um, I could see them assuming that because the Messiah, right, is supposed to be a king and a priest. So maybe they're trying to insert some type of fictional story to try to point that Solomon was supposed to be the Messiah or whatever. I don't know.
Unless they're just leaving out details and he gave it to the priest to do it.
Yeah, yeah. I just find it weird that that verse is even in there to begin with.
Yeah.
It's like out of character of the whole chapter. Like it's not really pertinent to the chapter. It's not really, going with the whole flow of the chapter. It's just kind of out of nowhere. Um, yeah. That's why I think it's not just omissions. I think there are verses that the Masoretic text is definitely adding in there um, to promote some type of doctrine. I would like to find out if those communities in Qumran were the only communities that believed that, the whole Levi and Judah thing. I would like to look more into that doctrine and that belief system. If that was something that was very a rabbinical type of belief system. So that's because it's kind of reminding me of that. Like I could see them adding that in there because he for them to make it look like the king who's not from Levi, who's from Judah, is allowed to do that and all that. And so anyway, but
Could I back us up a little
Yeah.
bit? I'm looking at verse verse 11, where Hiram comes to visit and look at the towns, and he was not happy with them at all. I'm wondering, I mean, did Solomon shortchange him, or was Hiram in the wrong for somehow?
Where does it say that he was unhappy?
Okay, this is a sec here. I'll start from verse 10. At the end of 20 years, which Solomon built these two buildings, the temple of Yahuwah and the royal palace, King Solomon gave 20 towns in Galilee to Hiram, king of Tyre, because Hiram had supplied him with all the cedar, the pine, and gold he wanted. But when Hiram went from Tyre to see the towns that Solomon had given him, he was not pleased with them.
Okay.
What kind of towns are these you have given me, my brother? He asked,
Okay.
and he called them the land of Kabul. So he wasn't happy.
I guess he thought that he was owed more than what he was given.
Right.
Maybe they had an agreement, and he felt like the cities he were given were not worth the amount of cedar he gave him.
Right,
Who knows?
right.
That seems to be like more of a disagreement type of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Like
perhaps the relationship he had with David, maybe David was different towards him. You know, maybe David seemed to appreciate him a little bit more than Solomon did, and maybe his expectations were pretty high.
Or Hiram was trying to use his relationship with his father,
yes, absolutely,
to get unfair payment.
True.
And trying to shortchange Solomon. That could,
Yeah.
and you got to realize too, who is giving him wisdom, right?
Yeah.
So he's not going to allow someone to shortchange him. So
Yeah.
So Solomon knows David didn't ask Yahuwah for wisdom. Solomon did. So
Right.
Solomon has technically, in a human understanding, more wisdom than what his dad did.
That's right. Yeah.
So he can see when someone's trying to take advantage, and so on and so forth. I think that's what's really happening. I think Hiram got a little greedy.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
I think so too.
Go ahead, brother Yahusha.
Could be that. I would just mention that just because Solomon had wisdom doesn't mean he always used it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the truth. Yeah, that was basically my question, was that which end was
Probably something about the payment. It seems like it's something about that he expected to be paid more for the gold he gave him and the cedar wood he gave him for the temple. He felt like it was worth more.
Yeah.
And you kind of see that with Yahushua and his parables, when the one parable where they say, well, you gave us the same payment as these guys that only worked for an hour. And then Yahushua explains the parable like, whatever price you agree upon, it's your fault.
Yeah.
That's the lesson Yahushua gives us in that parable. So it's kind of like the same thing. Even if Solomon shortchanged him, you agreed on the price, whatever he was going to give you. And that's another thing you got to think about too when you're doing business with someone. You got to make sure you're getting your fair share of payment. Once you agree upon something, it's done with. It's agreed upon.
Yeah, that's it.
So I kind of see that too as being a situation where Hiram he might have like saw what he was getting paid, and he's like, shouldn't I get more than this? Go ahead, brother Yahusha.
Actually, I'll bring that up after the study. I'll write it.
Yeah. But I was just reading that the other day. I was going through the Besor accounts, and I was just reading that proverb or parable Yahusha gave them and stuff like that. So you got to be shrewd is the point I'm making when you do business. You can't be gullible and allow someone to shortchange you. Is kind of the lesson he's trying to give. Captain's Chariots. Okay, so from what it looks like, some of these are supposed to be part of earlier in the chapter. Solomon brought up the daughter of Pharaoh out of the city of Daoud into his house, which he built for himself in those days. Yeah, that's right. This is interesting. So Solomon had a ship that he stationed near the sea of the land of Edom. That's kind of interesting. Huh. I think some versions will even say Navy there. Supposedly it was like a naval
Uh-huh.
ship.
Mhm.
Uh, and brought them to King Solomon. 120 talents of gold. Now, so the only thing left I could mention is verse 20 here. It would seem that he's making these Girgashites, Hivites, Jebusites, and Hivites to help him build the temple.
Yeah, right.
That seems to be the assumption by many that he was making these Nephilim tribes actually help him build Yahuwah's temple, using them for the labor.
It's not stupid. They were big and strong.
No, and if you go into history, if you just think about it historically, a lot of these megalithic structures, I think, there had to be some type of Nephilim involvement. When you look at the Pyramid of Giza, when you look at all these pyramids, the was it Stonehenge or
Oh yeah, and
Stonehenge, like all of that had help. Humans had help building that stuff.
Mhm.
It was not humans by themselves. So in a logic sense, it would make sense. But you know, so I just find that interesting that it seems like there's a hint to Solomon using these tribes that are left over, these descendants of the tribes, to build Yahuwah's temple. So trying to remember too. There's other ones that are rumored to be built by the giants. I'm trying to remember. I know Stonehenge is one. You have the Great Pyramid of Giza. You have what's the other one? Some claim. There's a lot of them, like the Mexican structures.
oh yeah.
I'm trying to remember something Quetzalcoatl something. But there's a lot of, like, you know, the Tower of Babel type of structures that are what do the Aztecs call them? They don't call them pyramids, they call them
Chichen Itza, I think, is what you're talking about.
no
In Mexico?
no there's they call these pyramids in those areas something different. I'm trying to remember. Ziggurat.
Oh.
A lot of the ziggurats, people claim that they might have had help for building the ziggurats and stuff like that. So when you really research into the whole pyramids thing and who built the pyramids, it kind of makes sense if humans had some type of help and stuff like that. So mhm. All right, so I think that's about it. That's all we can really say about chapter 9 there. Let's go to chapter 10. Oh, the Queen of Sheba chapter. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm. No. All right. So let's see here. Chapter 10. Queen of Sheba heard of the name of Solomon and the name of Yahuwah, and she came to try him with riddles. She came to Jerusalem with a very great train and camels. Now, see, train, I think in the ancient times, they would use the word train for like your robe. I think it's actually what it's talking about. And the reason I say this is if you go to the book of Ezekiel, right, where it shows the vision of Yahuwah in the temple, it says the train of Yahuwah's robe filled the temple. So train would be like the bottom of a garment, like the train.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So camels bearing spices, very much gold, precious stones. She came into Solomon and told him that all was in her heart. Solomon answered with questions, and not one question was overlooked by the king, which he did not answer her. Sheba saw all the wisdom of Solomon, the house he built, which he built, and the provision of Solomon sitting of his attendants, and standing on his servants, his raiment, his cupbearers, and his whole burnt offering, which he offered in the house of Yahuwah, and she was utterly amazed. And she said to King Solomon, it was a true report I heard in the land of your words and your wisdom, but I believed not them until you told me. But I believed them not that told me until I came and my eyes saw, and behold, the words as they reported to me are not even half of it. You have exceeded in tubeness all the report which I heard in my land. Baruch your wives, Baruch these your servants who stand before you continually, who hear all your wisdom. Baruch be Yahuwah your Eluah, who has taken you pleasure in you to set upon you the throne of Yashrael, because Yahuwah loved Yashrael to establish forever. He has made you king over them to execute judgment with right ruling and in all their cases or causes. She gave to Solomon 120 talents of gold, very many spices and precious stones. There had not come any other spices so abundant as those which Queen of Saba or Sheba gave to King Solomon. Now, I've heard supposedly that Sheba was in Ethiopia, supposedly, that's where she came from. The ship of Hiram, which brought the gold from Sufir, or is that supposed to say Ophir or Sufir?
Mine says Ophir.
Okay. Brought very much hewn timber, precious stones. The king made the hewn timber buttresses of the house of Yahuwah, and so it says, and the king made the hewn timber buttresses of the house of Yahuwah and the king's house, and lyres and harps for singers. Such hewn timber had not come upon the earth, nor had been seen anywhere until this day. So we're at verse 13 here. The king Solomon gave the queen of Sheba all that she desired, whatsoever she asked, besides all that he had given her by the hand of King Solomon. And she returned and came into her own land, she and her servants. And the weight of gold that came in Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. A lot of people want to read into this, and I get it, the whole 666. It could it be connecting to the anti-Messiah? Possibly. I'm not going to speculate too much on that with limited info that we have here. It could 6 could also represent, I've heard, also represents man being short of Yahuwah. man's number 6, Yahuwah's number 7. So there's also that concept in scripture. So go ahead, Sister Marissa.
So the Queen of Sheba, is she depicted as the whore that is writing? Is she depicted as something evil?
No. No, I think
You
I think people no, she's not the whore. A lot of people will just read too much into the whole this exact number of gold was given to Solomon, and they read too much into that. They read into that the exact number of gold that was physically given to him was 666. So people that only want to focus on the number in Revelations 13 of 666 get that understanding. But as far as this story itself, Sheba has nothing to do with the harlot of Revelations. She's just a queen of Ethiopia, it seems like, that's coming to Solomon, giving him this talent of gold, this much gold. There's no real like connection to the harlot. If anything, there's been actually legends that supposedly her and him had a affair going on, supposedly. This the Mishnah story of it is that they had a affair. He had children by her in Ethiopia, and all of a sudden you have this Ethiopic church that modern day wants to claim they're from Solomon. The same Ethiopic church that has the Book of Enoch in their Bible, that has all these other books in their Bible. So that's a story I know of. As far as the whole 666 thing, I think I would say that's a reach at best that it has something to do with the beast. I would say that's I don't like to say there's coincidences in scripture, but I think that's just a situation where you have a familiar number that people are looking at and they're like, oh, that must mean he's a type of the anti-Messiah. I don't really see that. I see Solomon as more of like he was an example of what happens when we let our pride get to us, and we've been chosen by Yahuwah for a purpose. And I think, if anything, Solomon in the earlier part of his life was a prophetic foreshadowing of Yahusha when he was righteous. When Solomon was righteous, he was a prophetic foreshadowing of Yahusha, and then he got corrupted. And this is not, by the way, he's not even corrupted at this point. There's no
That's right.
there at this point there's no hint that he's already worshiping other mighty ones yet. So this is probably like a little bit before that happens. So there's no real
right. I mean, he is worship, right?
What happened?
It seems as though he's being worshipped by
Well,
those
yeah,
Yeah.
she's kind of venerating him a bit. Yeah. I would say more or less she's kind of putting him on a pedestal because
Right.
of his fame.
Mhm.
The fame of him that's gone out through all the lands and what she was reported to him. I think she's also puffing him up a little bit. She might have a thing for him and she's kind of puffing him up.
Right.
But kind of like how when a woman really gets, captivated by a guy, they'll kind of, put him on a pedestal type of thing. But other than that, yeah, I don't think there's anything really linking to Revelations other than that one verse that people see the number 666 and they go right to Revelations 13 and all that.
And that's
Which is
what she's mentioned, right?
there's only 2 times the number 6 is mentioned in scripture. This is one of the times that number is used, and then the other time is the number of the beast or the symbol of the beast. And this is just my personal opinion, I more lean into the symbol being something we need to look at rather than the number. I personally believe that the symbol is more important because that's where we get the numbers from in Revelations 13, and that's the difference. Where this is just talking about the number 666. When you look at the number of the beast in Revelations in the original Greek, there's a symbol. It's not just 666. Chi Z stigma equals those three characters, Greek characters, equal numerically 666. But if you look at that symbol of itself is used in religious iconography.
Like with the Muslims, right? Remember we were
Yeah.
talking about that, how they
Yeah,
were.
so like just to show people what I'm talking about, how it's a difference with the Chi Z stigma, because if you look at the symbol where we get those numbers from, it's more pointing to certain religious institutions, like the let me see here.
Jihadists, right? The Muslim jihadists.
The Muslims, not all, only the Muslims, some Catholic. I've been trying to find these older Catholic JC paintings because some of them do have at least one or two of the letters on it. Let me see here. See if this one has it here. I know there's been paintings that claim that it's on there. I'm trying to see if I can find an old Catholic one. But yeah, the most popular one, like you said, is from Islam, the headband. The headband where they put on their forehead, they put this right here. And supposedly it means in the name of Allah. I don't know if it really means that, but that's what they claim it means. To kill in the name of Allah. So um
So Doug, are these letters Greek or what? What are these letters?
they're Greek characters that supposedly they were translated numerical values. So the chi or the chai supposedly equaled 600. The Z, which is the second character, equaled 60. And then the stigma equals the 6. So that's how you get 666. But the actual symbol is what John saw, or what was translated into Greek from maybe an earlier Hebrew or Aramaic manuscript. The actual characters he would have saw was this, and this is literally used in headbands, in the Islamic headbands. This is literally used in other religious iconography. Um, here, this is what I'm talking about. So not all three are here, but you do have the X one here. I think you have the chai. Let me see here. So you have the X on there. So you have the chai, and then you have Christos next to it. So, which is interesting because that means they at least had one of the three characters on these old JC paintings. I have yet to find one that has all three on it, though, to really direct it towards the Caesar Borgia JC of Catholicism. But in the
it was like a snake.
yeah, the middle one looks like a snake. Yeah, it's like an E and an S put together, pretty much. It's like they're that's what originally came from this manuscript here, the Codex Vaticanus 350 AD. So this is one of the oldest Greek manuscripts out there is the Vaticanus. There, it dates back to 3rd century AD for the New Testament. So, but yeah, you also, and if you look in the Strong's too, it also points it back to a cross as well, which I get it. The cross also goes back to the Tau. I get that too, but it seems to also go back to a cross. So, the whole idea of, in my opinion, Constantine seeing a cross in the sky, just because he saw a cross doesn't mean that was from Yahuwah. He could have saw, like, basically, the Chi Z stigma in the sky, because literally I think it was like, what was the story, Mom? It said conquer in this symbol, conquer or something like that. It was very similar to the phrasing of what the Islamists believe, in the name of Allah. So it's very similar to that, the Constantine story. They supposedly saw a cross in the sky. It said conquer in this symbol, you know. So, and we see that in Revelation 6, it says, in Revelation 6, it talks about the white horse rider who's not Yahusha. This is a separate white horse rider with the four horsemen. The spirit behind it is saying it was given to him to conquer. So I believe what Constantine was doing was Satan was, communing with him by a symbol, saying, by this conquer. And kind of the same thing with these Islamic jihadists, in the name of Allah or whatever supposedly it means to them. So that's what I believe actually happened with Constantine. If he was telling the truth at all and the vision ever happened. I'm just saying hypothetically. I'm not saying I know for a fact. I'm just saying hypothetically speaking, just because if he really did see a symbol in the sky, doesn't mean it was from Yahuwah. So that's where people get the assumption that he was a good guy or whatever. But anyway, and I understand too that the Tau is where the cross comes from. I get that. I get it's not evil of itself. I get that. I'm just making I'm just kind of explaining my theory about what I think really happened with him. I think he saw a symbol that the devil probably put in the sky, and he was led by that spirit of the white horse rider. He was led by that spirit to conquer. Go ahead, Brother Yahusha.
So I wanted to share a bit of this article that I was just looking at real quick. Because reading the mark begins with the last. Reading the mark that requires Hakma begins not with chi, but with the last letter stigma, an obsolete letter used to represent a number in the same way that pi represents an irrational number, the fraction 22/7. So the letter stigma was between the letters of the Greek alphabet, but the letter had not been in common usage for a century when John recorded his vision. The use of stigma should clue the auditor that there is something unusual about the three letters that would cause the third letter to function differently than the first two. Mark or stigma has a name that carries with it a relatively narrow usual assignment of meaning. Strong's number for stigma is 4742 from the root stizo, usually meaning to stick or to prick, as in a mark, incised, or punched to denote ownership. Thus, stigma is the action of pricking or punching a mark of ownership. Mark, tattoo, and then moving to the first letter. The first letter represents Christo. Returning to the front of chi excised stigma, the first letter chi produces the phonetic ch sound and is the common substitute for Christ, as in Xmas for Christmas. Roman Emperor claimed to have seen superimposed Greek letters. Chi-Rho is a heavenly sign. Or I'm going to skip that. So the middle letter represents the. So you have the stigma, right, which is a mark. You have the X. I guess that would be the Chi-Rho. Altogether, Chi-Rho stigma, basically in a nutshell, what this is saying is it means mark of Christ's cross. If you were to just read it in the meaning of the letters, like if you were to read it in a pictographic form, mark of Christ's cross.
Interesting. Since you have a Christos in Babylon, that all of his worshippers would have to put a T on their forehead or a headband. I'm trying to find the picture. There used to be a picture people had online where you could see it. It was almost like a bandana. And there would be the T for Tammuz in the middle of their forehead on the bandana. So this goes all the way back to Babylon. This goes back to Nimrod, Tammuz, and like Ash Wednesday essentially is Tammuz worship.
Yeah.
You putting a ash
And they do it in a
cross on your forehead.
Too. Yes, that's right.
You are literally branding yourself to the beast. And like I said, I'm not saying the cross, I just want to make this very clear. I'm not saying the T letter or the cross of itself is evil in origin. I'm not saying that. Because obviously we know the Tau is a T. Okay, so we're not saying that. What we're trying to say is using it as a religious symbol or using it in the form of worship is what's evil and what the devil has done.
Mhm.
But you can look it up yourself. There's tons of iconography here. You got this is supposed to be Osiris or whoever with a let me try to put the shared screen back on here if it's not on. He has like a T staff or a cross staff. So the idea that this was exclusively a Christian symbol or whatever is a lie. It's a lie because it's used in so many pagan religions that predate Christianity. This symbol right here. You got the Ankh. The Ankh is a stylized cross. Okay, the Ankh is the symbol of Osiris. So the idea that it's exclusive, to believers in Messiah is ridiculous. That is not true at all. So I just want to make that clear because I'm not trying to say the T originally was evil or the Tau is evil. I'm not trying to say that. What I'm trying to say is this is what the beast used as his symbol. And this is what his symbol was used in Babylon, even before the scriptures were even written. So Yahuwah very possibly could be telling John, like Brother Yahusha was just reading from that article, that this is literally what it means. The three characters in Greek means the cross, the Christ's cross. That literally is what it means. So that is showing too that we probably shouldn't be calling him Christ either. We probably shouldn't be calling Yahusha Christ if the beast is being called that. That's probably not a good title to be using. But there's a whole history of that where Christos was always used for general anointed ones. If you want to, you can do your own research, and if you want, I can give you guys, leads to that type of research. But every anointed pagan false Messiah was called Christos at the end. It was not exclusive to the scriptures at all. You had what was the first Santa called, Mom? What was his name? Mithra. The original Santa Claus, Mithra, was called Mithra Christos. Serapis Christos. Many of them had Christos at the end of their name. So I know there's the argument, oh, well, it's in the Greek, it's in the Septuagint. We don't have the original Septuagint. So even to make an argument from there is you're basically putting blind faith that Greek heathens wouldn't replace a title in the scriptures with something else and wouldn't mistranslate it on purpose. So that's another thing you got to realize too, is that we don't have the original Septuagint. The original Septuagint was 300 BC. That has been lost for the most part. It's all fragmented at this point. What we have today is modern copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. So to claim that modern copy of a copy of a copy, some man somewhere wouldn't put in Christos and replace the original Greek word with Christos, I don't think that's too far-fetched in my opinion. When you don't see that in the Hebrew culture, you don't see them using pagan terminology to refer to a Messiah. You don't see that. So that to me is out of character for us to, be calling him that. But that's a whole nother story. But that's the point is what Brother Yahusha is trying to bring up and what I'm bringing up is the symbol itself is telling you who the beast is. Those three characters, Greek characters itself, are telling you who the beast is. So anyway, but I used to be able to find a picture of that headband. If I can, I'll share it to you guys. But there was an original Tammuz headband that had the T in literally on the middle of the headband so that it would literally look like you have the first letter of his name on your forehead, which is like an imprint, a tattoo. When you take Ash Wednesday, you technically are tattooing yourself.
Yeah.
Whether it's permanent or not, I mean, you can rub it off, but it's still the ritual in the Catholic Church of imprinting yourself with a symbol on your forehead. And, obviously Yahuwah doesn't want us doing that. Yahuwah's seal is not a tattoo. He doesn't tattoo his people. So even if Yahuwah was going to use the tau, it would not be visible. It would not be, so, that's the difference. The devil wants to use something physical. Yahuwah spiritually seals us. He spiritually has his name on us. He's not going to tattoo us. Because I see people like rationalizing, well, Yahusha has the word of Yahuwah written on his thigh. And I'm like, that's allegoric. I'm like, I get so mad when people use that argument. I'm like, that's not a tattoo. It's written on his thigh. Even if it's physical, it would be on, like, what do you call, Mom? His robe. It would be on his, even if that's physical, that's not literally on his body. So that, but anyway.
That he walks in the power of the word, because your thigh is the strongest part of your leg.
That's right. The authority. Yep.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so the name of this link here is the keyofdavid.org, mark of the beast, HTML. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, some will say, too, that if you look at the Star of Remphan, that it equals to 666. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's where I see a lot of those images on Google trying to claim that. That supposedly the circumference or whatever, I don't know how they would get that, but that basically the star of Saturn, I don't know how they would get that unless I see what they're saying, because it's a 6-pointed star, 6-sided hexagon, and 6 triangles within the hexagon. I guess that's kind of a reach, though. I get what they're trying to say. It's a little bit of a reach. Either way, it's of the devil. I mean, either way, it's, Daoud never had this.
Yeah.
It comes from Saturn, actually, and it comes from them getting these fake photos of Saturn where there's a cube on the North Pole of Saturn, which I find interesting because, the whole theories about the North Pole and about Satan, what he says in Isaiah 14, he talks about, I will raise my throne above the stars of the north. So, it's kind of interesting. But I don't even think that's a real picture, to tell you the truth. I don't think I doubt it. Knowing what I know about the planets and what scripture would say about planets, I doubt that's a real picture. Seriously doubt it. But that goes into like the Saturn worship, the cube worship, why you got cubes everywhere and all that, the cube on the forehead. Since we're on this topic here, I might as well show you the whole, let's see, the Jewish Shema cube. This is what they're deceived into doing in Judaism. Let me see if I can, here we go. Right here, they put it in a little box. They're told to put it in a little box, and then they put it on their head.
Oh, yeah. That explains a lot.
Cube worship.
Yeah, a lot of them in the land, they wear those hats that
it's not even a hat. It's like a belt. They tie this cube object that they put the Shema in, and they put it on their forehead between their eyes. So they try to say, well, this is what it means to have it between your eyes.
Yeah.
And so
what good does that do you?
That's right.
How does that make you any closer to Yahuwah?
To them, it's just vain repetition, like literally memorizing stuff, and that's it. There's like no spiritualness.
No, none.
It's not even about relationship. It's about just being able to memorize stuff. Just like in the church, like they focus you. I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but they make you focus on like things like remembering how to find each book in the Bible, but you never learn the Bible. It's like repetitious, like, Okay, that's great, but what does that chapter say, or what does
Yeah,
you,
no, that's
you know?
true.
It's like the church focuses on like lesser things rather than the more important things, and that's what Judaism does too. By the way, this is what they consider the mezuzah. By the way, something like this they call the mezuzah, even though mezuzah actually means doorpost. This is they put it like in a little box, and then they put it on their doorpost. So that's what they consider that. But there's a lot of other rabbinical things they do in their religion that are just like no purpose to it, adding to the Torah doesn't make sense. It's just like even the guys that wrote the Targums would disagree with the way they do the Shema today and the way they do it on the doorpost today. Even they would disagree. So there's their own who they claim to be their ancestors would disagree with them and say you're doing it wrong. So, but anyway,
Yeah, that's funny. I bought one of those mezuzahs for an ex-Jewish boyfriend I had, and he put it on his door.
usually they'll put one verse in it too. Usually it's like
And a prayer.
It's-
There's a prayer in it.
it's like
You know,
usually usually it's Deuteronomy 6:4. They'll write it out and they just do Deuteronomy 6:4 and that's it. And they just put it in the mezuzah. So the actual chapter says to write the whole law.
That's right.
If you actually look at the mezuzah chapter, it actually tells you to ascribe the whole law to your doorpost, not just one verse. So this is where like the rabbinicalness comes in, because it's very clear what he's saying. He's saying to write the rest of all these commandments. Let me see here where it starts here. It says, "Hear, O Yasharal Yahuwah, our Eluah is one Yahuwah. You shall love you, Yahuwah your Eluah with all your heart, all your mind." All these words, he didn't say just verse 4. All these words, all that I command you this day shall be in your heart and in your soul. You shall teach them to your children. You shall speak of them sitting in the house and walking by the way and lying down, rising up. Now, right here, this is where it gets tricky. This is where they change the text here. The LXX says, "And you shall fasten them as a sign upon your hand, and it shall be immovable before your eyes." So this is a spiritual sign. Now, this is the part where you're writing them. Verse 9. You shall write them, meaning all the words he just said, all these words, on the lintel of your houses and of your gates. And the Targums would expound in verse 9 there to kind of give you a better understanding of what he means. He's talking about writing them.
Then I have a question. Was all of Yashraal guilty of violating this? Because it seemed like they were constantly going to the temple to hear the word, to hear the law.
I mean, I think the temple thing was more though of fellowship and to be, I guess, in Messiah's time, I think they definitely were in violation of it because they probably didn't even like read the scripture for themselves at all at that point. They were depending on a synagogue system. So I would say they were guilty by the time you had the synagogue system. But I think from Deuteronomy up until the time of Solomon, they were, ascribing these to their doorposts. I think the temple system was more about corporate worship. It was more about fellowship. It was more about gathering together, not necessarily to try to get to hear a word, not necessarily to hear the word rather than reading it for themselves. I think that didn't happen. This is just my opinion from what I've looked up historically. That didn't happen until like the early Talmudic period and the early like after they came back from Babylon, it slowly evolved into that to where they're depending on a rabbi to read a scroll and they're no longer, studying the scriptures out for themselves. I think that's why Paul says what he says, because he's writing to his fellow brothers and sisters as well. Like, this is the duty of us. We need to be able to rightly divide the word on our own. And in Paul's period, in Messiah's period, from like 30 something AD on, there was this synagogue system of, you got this pyramid scheme. You all go to this guy to hear the word, kind of like the church. It's kind of like the church system. And I don't think they had that though early on. I don't think like Masha's generation all the way to King Dawood's generation, I don't think you had that. I think you would have had people actually adhering to this command. But I think once they got really apostate and the captivity happened and this or that happened, I think that part of that was them. Also, I think the word was actually taken away from them in the captivity, if I'm not mistaken. I think Yahuwah at some point took his word away from them. You know, I forget exactly where it is. I think it's in Jeremiah somewhere. I know he took his name from them. That I know. That I know. He even says, no longer will you call upon my name because of their sins. So I also think that they lost Yahuwah's word too in captivity. Either Yahuwah took it away from them at some point, or they lost it, and they needed new versions of the word to be made, and that's why that's where the Ezra time period came about in Nehemiah, where they're either doing new translations of the word, or they're
So he had mercy on Daniel then, because Daniel called upon his name and prayed.
Well,
okay, so I'm thinking that he had mercy.
I think the ones that he was talking to, Mom, were the ones in Jerusalem.
Oh, all right, okay.
He said the rebellious Yahudim who wanted to go back to Egypt.
Right. Okay.
He was like, no, you're not going to use my name anymore. You're not going to call upon my name anymore. And but that's the best way I could explain what happened in Messiah's time period. When you go to 33 AD, no one probably had these on their doorposts. No one probably they were so apostate that really, even in Messiah's time period, they didn't really fully turn back to Yahuwah after the captivity. That's why one of the reasons they got taken over by the Romans, if I'm not mistaken, was it was almost like a punishment. That was a punishment for them not fully turning back to Yahuwah with their whole heart. But I would assume from Moshe's time period to Solomon's time period, they were doing this, what Deuteronomy 6:9 says. I would assume. I know some people, they have their own opinions and think this is allegory. I don't see the point of writings using the word right as allegory. I don't see that as making any sense. Just with the language of this verse, it doesn't make any sense. Go ahead, Brother Yahusha. I see you got your hand up.
Oh, no, that's all.
Okay. But yeah, that's the only reason I believe this is physical, is the wording here is, you shall write them on your lintels, on your houses, on your gates. That seems very literal to me. That seems, and what I do, mainly because of how the Targums word it and explain it and expound in this verse, they would expound it as, you are writing the commands on parchment, physically on parchment, and you're ascribing them to your physical doorpost. That's how they originally interpreted this verse, by the way. The modern Judaism today turned that, the scrolls being ascribed on your doorpost, they changed that to the little metal mezuzah, that they put on. So even the rabbinical scribes of the Targums would disagree with modern Judaism today and would say that they are taking away from the word, and they're pretty much, they're not obeying the command. You're putting one little verse in a box. That's not what the chapter says. It says it says all these words that I'm commanding you today. All these. So that would mean like the whole Torah. You are to write them on your lintels of your houses and of your gates. So that's mainly why I explain to people why I believe it's physical, and why I have physical scrolls on our door frames here. I have physical scrolls that I write out. But anyway, that's what I personally believe. But anyway, let me see here. Where was I at, Mom? Was I halfway through chapter 10, or where was I at?
Let me see. I
I
thought
think I was at 14 or 15 at least in First Kings chapter 10. I know I didn't finish it. Yeah. It was came to Seba. Oh no, maybe I did finish it. Okay.
I think you did.
Yeah, sorry everyone. My brain is not working fully capacity today. Okay. Um so land of the Philistines. See, this is what I mean by like what they call Israel today is not all of the land that was given to them.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see this in scripture. Like Solomon reigned from over all the kings from the river to the land of the Philistines and to the borders of Egypt. And Brother Yahusha, didn't you bring up like a week or so ago? You looked into this. Goshen was part of the land that was given to them, or you could understand that by them being given Goshen, they're given part of the land of Egypt. So technically, their borders go way broader than the
Yeah,
state of
because
Israel.
Abraham was promised all of the land from the river of Egypt to the river of Ethiopia. Goshen was in that border. You have you have two sides to Egypt. You have Egypt on the left side of the Egypt River. I guess that would be the Nile, and then you have Egypt on the right side. Everything on the right side, all the way to the left side of the Ethiopian River. So basically, from the river of when he says from the river of Egypt to the river of Ethiopia, that's anything in between. That includes all the left, I mean, all the right side of Egypt, which includes Goshen, was promised to Abraham, not just the land of Canaan.
Interesting.
But I guess you could also one could argue that possibly only Canaan was given to Yashraal, and maybe other parts that were promised to Abraham were given to other of his children. Um, I don't know if that's a valid argument, though. It is something that popped up into my mind.
Hmm. Hmm.
However, Yashraal were the ones in Goshen, and they were given that land by Pharaoh. Not to mention that they were given it to the Pharaoh who, through Joseph, through Yahuwah's hand. So it seems as if that land was given to Yashraal.
They had a big amount then because Ethiopia from Egypt is really far. It's at least 1,000 miles.
I think in the original promise he gives to Abraham, it's definitely a lot bigger than what they have today, or what's over there today. Let me see if I can find that promise in I think it's Genesis 14.
It's
Or
just it's strange, and I don't know how to reconcile that promise given to Abraham by the time they go into the promised land, because at that time it seems like he's giving Canaan to Yashraal, and they're going past, technically even all the wilderness area would have been their land, and yet he's still bringing them into Canaan. So I'm not sure, like maybe all of the land outside of Canaan within those borders are for like end times and not necessarily at that time.
Hmm. Sure.
Because they definitely weren't given um, anything outside of Canaan other than Goshen. Like when they went into the promised land, they definitely weren't given the areas outside of Canaan. And yet it was promised to Abraham. So
I just find it all interesting because I'm into all this stuff. It's amazing how much property, how big that area is. Blows my mind. I mean, from the Egyptian, because Ethiopia actually is a lot closer to South Africa than it is to northern where Libya and Egypt and all of that. So it's incredible how big that area is.
Hmm. Yeah, it truly is.
Yep. Now this is going to be the chapter that this is going to be the downfall of Solomon here. This is going to be the start of his downfall. And so let's see here. I read, Mom, you read. Let's see here. Sister Marissa, would you like to read chapter 11?
Sure. Let me get my Bible.
See here. I need to get some coffee.
Oh.
Was it First Kings?
Yes.
Hold on.
Yeah. First Kings 11. Oh.
And it came to pass about a month after this that Nas, the Ammonite, went up and encamped against Jabes Galad. And all the men of Jabes said to Nas, the Ammonite, make a covenant with us, and we will serve thee. Nas, the Ammonite, said to them, on these terms will I make the covenant with you, that I should put out all your right eyes, and I will lay a reproach upon Israel. And the men of Jabes said to him, allow us 7 days, and we will send messengers into all the coasts of Israel. If there
Hold
should
on.
be,
Hold on,
Sis, are you
sis.
sure you're in? I don't think you're in the right chapter.
you said First Kings, right?
Yeah, First Kings 11. If you have a Septuagint, that's going to be Third Kings.
I'm in the wrong one.
Yeah, no, it's confusing in the Septuagint. The Septuagint confused it a little bit.
I know.
It's Third Kings 11 if you have a Septuagint.
Yes, I do. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, chapter 11, right? Okay, and King
Yep.
Solomon was a lover of women, and he had 700 wives, princes, and 300 concubines. And he took strange women as well as the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabitish, Ammonitish women, Syrians and Edomians, Shittites and Amorites of the nations concerning whom Yahuwah forbade the children of Israel, saying, ye shall not go into them, and they shall not come into you, lest they turn away your hearts after their idols. Solomon clave to these in love. And it came to pass in the time of the old age of Solomon that his heart was not perfect with Yahuwah his Elohim, as was the heart of David his father. As to Astarte, the abomination of the Sidonians, and to Astarte, the abomination of the Sidonians. Then Solomon built a high place to Chemosh, the idol of Moab, and to their king, the idol of the children of Ammon. And thus he acted towards all his strange wives, who burnt incense and sacrificed to their idols. And Solomon did that which was evil in the sight of Yahuwah. He went not after Yahuwah as David his father, and the strange women turned away his heart after their mighty ones. And Yahuwah was angry with Solomon because he turned away his heart from Yahuwah, Elohim of Israel, who had appeared twice to him, and charged him concerning this matter. By no means to go after other mighty ones, but to take heed to what Yahuwah Elohim commanded him. Neither was his heart perfect with Yahuwah, according to the heart of David his father. And Yahuwah said to Solomon, because it has been thus with thee, and thou hast not kept my commandments and my ordinances, which I command thee, I will surely rend thy kingdom out of thy hand, and give it to thy servant. Only in thy days I will not do it for David thy father's sake, but I will take it out of the hand of thy son. Only I will not take away the whole kingdom. I will give one tribe to the son of David, my servants, thy son for David, my servant's sake, and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen. And Yahuwah raised up the enemy Yahuwah raised up an enemy to Solomon, Adar the Idumean, and Esrom, son of Eliade, who dwelt in Ramah, and Adadezer, king of Suba, his master. And men gathered to him, and he was head of the conspiracy, and he seized on Damascus. And there were adversaries to Israel all the days of Solomon. And Adar the Idumean was of the seed royal of Idumea. And it happened that while David was utterly destroying Edom, while Joab, captain of the host, was going to bury the dead, when they slew every male in Idumea. For Joab and all Israel abode there 6 months in Idumea until they utterly destroyed every male in Idumea. That Adar ran away, he and all the Idumeans of the servants of his father with him, and they went into Egypt. And Adar was then a little child. And there rise up men out of the city of Madian, and they come to Pharaoh, and take men with them, and come to Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Adar went into Pharaoh, and he gave him a house, and appointed him provision. And Adar found great favor in the sight of Pharaoh, and he gave him his wife's sister in marriage, the elder sister of Tekemina. And the sister of Tekemina bore to him, even to Adar, Ganebach the son, and Tekemina brought him up in the midst of the sons of Pharaoh, and Ganebach was in the midst of the sons of Pharaoh. And Adar heard in Egypt that David slept with his fathers, and that Joab, the captain of the host, was dead. And Adar said to Pharaoh, let me go, and I will return to my country. And Pharaoh said to Adar, what lackest thou with me, that lo, thou seekest to depart to thy country? And Adar said to him, by all means let me go. So Adar returned to his country. This is the mischief which Adar did, and he was bitter enemy of Israel, and he reigned in the land of Edom. And Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, the Ephratite of Sarira, the son of a widow, was servant of Solomon. And this was the occasion of his lifting up his hands against King Solomon. Now King Solomon built the citadel. He completed the fortification of the city of David his father. And the man Jeroboam was very strong, and Solomon saw the young man that he was active, and he set him over the levies of the house of Joseph. And it came to pass at that time that Jeroboam went forth from Jerusalem, and Achiah the Selenite, the prophet, found him in the way, and caused him to turn aside out of the way. And Achiah was clad with a new garment, and they two were alone in the field. And Achiah laid hold of his new garment that was upon him, and tore it into 12 pieces. And he said to Jeroboam, take to thyself 10 pieces, for thus saith Yahuwah Elohim of Israel, behold, I rend the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon, and will give thee 10 tribes. Yet he shall have 2 tribes for my servant David's sake, and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel. Because he forsook me and sacrificed to Astarte, the abomination of the Sidonians, and to Chemosh, and to the idols of Moab, and to their king, the abomination of the children of Ammon. And he walked not in my ways to do that which was right before me, as David his father did. Howbeit, I will not take the whole kingdom out of his hand, for I will certainly resist him all the days of his life, for David my servant's sake, whom I have chosen. But I will take the kingdom out of the hand of his son, and give thee 10 tribes. But to his son I will give the 2 remaining tribes, that my servant David may have an establishment continually before me in Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen for my people, for myself, to put my name there. And I will take thee, and thou shalt reign as thy soul desires, and thou shalt be king over Israel. And it shall come to pass, if thou wilt keep all the commandments that I shall give thee, and will walk in my ways, and do that which is right before me, to keep my ordinances and my commandments, as David my servant did, that I will be with thee, and will build thee a sure house, as I built to David. And Solomon sought to slay Jeroboam, but he arose and fled into Egypt, to Susa king of Egypt, and he was in Egypt until Solomon died. And the rest of the history of Solomon, and all that he did, and all his wisdom, behold, are not these things written in the book of the life of Solomon? And the days during which Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel were 40 years. And Solomon slept with his fathers, and they buried him in the city of David his father. And it came to pass, when Jeroboam son of Nebat heard of it, even while he was yet in Egypt, as he fled from the face of Solomon and dwelt in Egypt, he straightway comes into his own city, into the land of Sarirah in the mount of Ephraim. And King Solomon slept with his fathers, and Rehoboam his son reigned in his stead. Now, isn't it interesting how, after everything that Solomon did, Yahuwah allowed him to literally be buried in the city of David, his father? But my question is, it says here that Solomon was old. It says, and it came to pass in the time of the old age of Solomon, that his heart was not perfected. So it doesn't tell you like how long it was before he actually started to stray. But it says here that he was old. Like, how old was he before? So that means that for a very long time, his heart was right before Yahuwah. Because it says here that it came to pass at the time of the old age that his heart was not perfect. So that means that he was perfect before Yahuwah for a very long time. And as I'm reading this, it reminds me of the story of Saul. How Yahuwah rented Saul's kingdom away from him and gave it to David. But here, it says that he gave it to, was it Jeroboam?
Right.
Was it? Okay, so Jeroboam was not even a kin of Solomon, but he only kept 2 of the tribes for the sake of David, and he gave 10 of the tribes to someone that wasn't even kin of David. But as I'm reading this, it just reminds me of the 10 tribes that left and the 2 that kept that remained. So it's kind of, it has some sort of an allegory to that story regarding Saul and the 2 and the tribes, the 10 and 2 tribes. I don't know if anybody saw that while I was reading.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Mom. I was just gonna quickly comment. Yeah, I noticed that this is the first instance of the 2 houses thing. This is the exact moment that the kingdom is going to be divided. And even though it was technically, you could say it was technically, they were always at odds with one another, it wasn't physically severed until this point, to where now you have one king for the 10 northern, and then you have another king for the southern. So I think the reason to answer, I don't know, Marissa, if she was asking a question about this or not, but Jeroboam, the reason he doesn't have to be a son of Solomon is because he's actually taking over the northern house.
Right.
The northern house. So it's like a little loophole that Yahuwah used because there you can be a king over Ephraim or a leader over Ephraim without, being a Judean. So technically that's now it seems like Jeroboam was actually his mother was a widow. It's interesting. Son of a widow, servant of Solomon. So he was like a household servant. Now, what's interesting, there might be something spiritual to that as well with Jeroboam. Even though he didn't turn out to be righteous, there's a concept that Yahuwah will give a servant that wants to truly serve him and stay under Yahuwah forever, a name better than a son. He even mentions this in prophecy that, don't let the eunuch say I'm separated from Yahuwah's people. I will give you a name better than sons and daughters. So this could have been like a little hint that you can be a servant or be grafted in and be considered like a son. So I don't know. I might be too much reading into that, but that seems to align with what the Torah has to say about a household servant and all that. Go ahead, Brother Yahusha, and then my mom.
On the same note of Solomon's heart not being right before Yahweh, it doesn't exactly specify other than that he went after the mighty ones of his wives and his concubines. Now that they had two questions with that, because it says that that David's heart was right before Yahweh, and yet we know that David wasn't perfect. We know that he committed adultery and he committed murder. So I'm wondering, even though it doesn't say it, it just like I don't know if we can really know, but I'm wondering if Solomon's heart wasn't right because he fornicated with these other mighty ones, or if that he fornicated with them for so long and Yahweh kept telling him to repent and he didn't. Like, because David did repent. So was his heart different than his dad's heart because he committed spiritual fornication where his dad only committed physical fornication, or was it because he continuously did it? And I'm sure that Yahweh, came to him and told him to repent like the first or second time.
Yeah. I would say there was more things that are not mentioned that he did as well. Like Solomon didn't pay attention to the rules being a king. You're not supposed to multiply your wives so much. You're not supposed to didn't he multiply his horses too much, Mom? That's one of the commandments for not a king to do. So according to tradition too, it seems like he married the wives also to for political reasons so that there would be peace in his reign. So now you have him making covenants technically with other nations that he's not supposed to be doing. So there was a lot of sin Solomon was doing that he wasn't supposed to be doing, that he would rationalize and say, well, there was peace during my reign, so it was worth it. And supposedly there's even traditions that these women that he married, he actually allowed them to have their own houses so they could offer sacrifices to their gods. So now you have idolatry being allowed, not just from him, but being allowed from the wives in the land of Israel. Now you're having high places spring up. Now you're having, there was a lot of things he was doing. There was a lot of bad stuff. And when he started turning away from Yahuwah, there was a lot of things. It wasn't just the spiritual fornication. There was so many things that he was doing wrong. And he would just rationalize, the king, the commandments of the king thing. Even he failed short of that by a decent bit. Like he was not supposed to multiply his wives that much. He was not supposed to multiply his horses. So there was issues with that as well. And I think there was a lot of things. I just think like you said about Daud repented and didn't go back to that. Solomon kept
Yeah.
making the same sins again and again deliberately. And so that's the biggest issue, is that he did that, and he basically really never, it seemed like he was never really serving Yahuwah towards the end of his life at all. But you see in other places in scripture where it says they did not fully serve him with their whole heart, sometimes it refers to relaxing some of the commandments. So, like, for example, right, Hezekiah, I think, is one of them, where they didn't get rid of the high places, right?
Mm-hmm.
He didn't serve Yahuwah with his whole heart because he didn't get rid of the high places. So Yahuwah considers, like, you lessen even the least, right?
Yeah,
Matthew
yeah.
5.
That's right.
Matthew 5 even says this. You lessen the least, you'll be least in the kingdom. So it's the concept of that Solomon would, he wasn't fully wholeheartedly after Yahuwah's commands, even in his heart, like his dad was. His dad was actually, even though he committed fornication early on in his life, he was continually repenting to Yahuwah of other sins and not committing those same sins again.
Mhm.
So I think also it's the mindset too of what it means to serve Yahuwah with your whole heart. Solomon seemed to harden his heart at the end of his life to where, oh, it doesn't matter. Yahuwah will understand. I got these wives for political reasons. I'm allowing them to worship their gods in Israel. I'm allowing them to do this. I'm starting to take part in the. I mean, it's bad enough he allowed them to commit the idolatry themselves, but then he started worshiping their mighty ones, and and I mean, there was definitely other issues like like I said, the king commands, the fact that he did not adhere to them definitely was not something Yahuwah took lightly either. Um, you know, so I think there was like multiple issues with him, like later on in his life. And yeah, yeah. But mom, what were you
Well,
gonna say?
yeah, I just would kind of like to try to tie the whole thing up. I just want to say to Marissa that I understand some of the questions that you were having. I have those same questions because, you know, I just, I just care so deeply for David and just Solomon being, one of the four sons that he had, but him being, because Yahuwah wanted him as king, he was definitely a favored son, and I do believe that he loved Yahuwah with all of his heart, and I believe for those first, I think it was about 20 years, because the temple, they said, took, I believe it was 17 years before the palace and the temple. So it was between 17 and 20 years that he was serving him wholeheartedly. And the other thing is that, it is kind of left open-ended for us. We're not given a Psalm 51 for Solomon the way we're given for his father David. But in my opinion, the only thing that we can hope is that the book of Ecclesiastes could somehow sway us in the area that he did have a repentant heart, that he was sorry about those things. He definitely knew that they were nothing. He kept on saying the only thing that matters is the commandments and obeying. And that says at least once or twice towards the end of the book of Ecclesiastes. And he goes on to say how none of it matters. It's all rubbish. It's, what's been done before will be done again, not to reiterate everything, but just to say that he knew that it was for nothing, that it was absolutely meaningless. And I just personally, just between brothers and sisters, really do hope that Solomon got himself back. I do think two things in the end. It makes me feel good that Yahuwah did allow him not only to be buried with David and his fathers, but in the tomb of David. I think that speaks a little bit. And also, it makes my heart glad that Yahusha in Matthew chapter 5 mentions Solomon. At least once he mentions him in his sermons. And that makes me feel glad that he didn't just forget about him and dismiss him as if he never existed, you know? So I don't know. That's just kind of me being emotional. And, I can't help but I get upset when I hear people refer to Solomon as, oh, well, he was just a horrible, all his life. No, he wasn't all his life. As a matter of fact, Father would not have chosen him if he did not have some kind of promise, at least to build his house.
Mhm.
It was his plan, it was his prophecy that this was going to happen. And, you can't just dismiss it like that. And that's my final word on the subject.
Mhm. There's an old saying: you're a man can either have a great woman by his side, or the women that he has by his side can ruin him.
Yeah.
It's one or the other.
That's true.
So we also have to take that into consideration. He had a lot of pagan women
Yeah.
that corrupted him, and this is why Yahuwah tells us, men, if we're going to be a king, this is what we got to do. And if you look at Deuteronomy 17 here, he
Yes.
broke basically every commandment of how to be a king. Okay. You shall not multiply himself to horses. Strike one.
Mhm.
He shall not, lest he should multiply horses. For Yahuwah said, you shall not go any more back that way. Talking about going back to Egypt. He shall not multiply himself wives. Strike two. Lest his heart turn away. He shall not greatly multiply himself silver and gold. Now, I would say the gold thing, he's also in violation of too. So you have three violations within just this law about how kings are supposed to act as being a king of Israel. You're not supposed to multiply yourself. You're greatly multiply your gold, greatly multiply wives, greatly multiply horses, which if I'm not mistaken, he did all three. I could be wrong, but I think he did all three. So he pretty much did not even care to obey the laws of how to be a king. So that to me is one of the reasons I think Yahuwah looked at it the way he looked at it, that Solomon did not serve him wholeheartedly like Daud, his dad, did.
Yeah.
And I don't even know about the repetition of the law. That's not even mentioned in scripture. Who knows if he actually adhered to this either? We have no idea. This is supposed to be done too. He's supposed to write himself a copy of the whole Torah and by the hands of the priests. So the priests, actually, let me correct myself, supposed to write him a copy of the Torah to study, to know. You're supposed to know the Torah front and back to be a king.
Mhm.
So there's like a whole list in Deuteronomy 17 of what you're supposed to do. And a lot of these he didn't do.
But the father allowed him to be buried in a place where obviously, because it says that he was gathered
Yes.
with the rest of in the city of David, which is like highly sacred to Yahuwah. If he was really like Saul, I mean, Saul was not even buried. He was just left out. His body was, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay. To Solomon, where even though Solomon had 1,000 wives, 700 wives, 300 concubines, and he did all the stuff, he worshipped all of these mighty ones, but yet the father buried him. Compare that to what happened to Saul, right?
Yeah.
Saul,
Yeah, well, to be fair, Yahuwah never made any promises to Saul's family. So to be fair, I guess Yahuwah didn't feel really obligated to show mercy to Saul and on account of his dad, like he did with Solomon. The Davidic promise in that Davidic covenant Yahuwah made, it was a lot of it had to do with Daud's descendants. So it's also promises to his descendants and how he would treat his descendants. And even the kingdom, giving it to Rehoboam, was a promise that he made to Solomon, saying, listen, I know you screwed up a lot. You have not served me wholeheartedly. Listen, but I'm still giving part of the kingdom to your son because of what I promised to your father. So really, a lot of the times Yahuwah, when he shows us mercy, it's really due to the patriarch of the family in a weird way. The patriarch who he was in covenant with,
Oh yeah, I agree with that.
the descendants get the barakas
Yeah.
regardless. And you can go to Genesis 12. Regardless of how Abraham's descendants acted, they got baraked because of Abraham, right? Regardless of how they acted, regardless of his later descendants being, some of them being very wicked, they were still baruched because of what Abraham did. So sometimes that happens too. Sometimes, just like sins of the father trickle down, curses from the ancestors, you could have barakas from your ancestors. And it's kind of like it goes hand in hand. So just because, I think Solomon, a lot of the way Yahuwah treated him was because of who his dad was. A lot of the reason Yahuwah gave him so much mercy at the end was like, well, your dad served me wholeheartedly. I'm kind of being a little merciful to you right now because of your dad.
But he
And-
also
I
showed,
read that,
right? He also showed a lot of mercy to David.
Yeah,
Yes.
True.
But
can I read
David,
that promise?
David didn't have someone that came before him where Yahuwah had promised anything to David, and yet still he showed great mercy to David.
Yeah, but the Davidic covenant is what I'm referring to. When he made that promise to Davidic covenant, like brother Yahusha was about to say something about that as well. You have to go back to that Davidic covenant and see some of the promises he gives directly to Daud and his direct lineage. That he promised that there would always even though it's mistranslated, it does say there would always be a king. There's certain promises Yahuwah gives to Daud that he never gave to other Israelites. So Solomon is kind of like the point I was trying to make is he's benefiting from his more righteous dad of how he acted in covenant towards Yahuwah. And sometimes that happens, like with the Abrahamic covenant. Go ahead, brother Yahusha.
I think that you said one. Well, I'd like to share the promise that he gave to David, but real quick before that, you mentioned Marissa that he was merciful to David, but that he didn't have the same promise that was given to David regarding his lineage. And I would say the reason that was because David was a man after Yahweh's own heart. He walked in the same way that Abraham walked, and so with like people like Abraham, with people like David, he treats them in a different way because of their, I guess, their loyalty to him, their dedication to him, their heart towards him. Or even though they make mistakes, they're just on a different level than a lot of other people, where they're serving him with everything that they are, versus Solomon. Yahuwah's mercy towards Solomon is based off of the promise given to David, as like when you get to, so that promise would be, where is it at? Second Kings, or where I put it. Hold on.
I have it on the shared screen. If you, I found
go ahead.
yeah, Second Samuel 7:8-16 records it, so we can read it from here. Now, therefore, thus shall I say to my servant Daud, thus says Yahuwah of armies, I took you from the sheepfold, from the following the sheep, to be ruler over my people, over Yashral, and I have been with you wherever you have gone, and have cut off all your enemies from. Let me see if it'll kind of drop down here. Okay, here we go. Biblia. So this is by Logos Software. I'm reading from here. Okay. I have been with you. I've cut off all your enemies before you, which again is a messianic promise, by the way. Cut off all your enemies. That's a foreshadowing to Yahusha, subjecting his enemies under his feet and all that. And have made you a great name, like the name of the great men who are of the earth. Moreover, I will appoint a place for my people Yashrael. I will plant them, that they may dwell in the place of their own, and move no more, nor shall the sons of wickedness oppress them anymore. And previously, since the time that I commanded judges to be over my people Yashrael, I have caused you to rest from all your enemies. So that's another promise that he fulfilled, to give him rest. When your days are fulfilled, you will rest with your fathers. So this here, technically, if this is for all David's lineage, right?
Yeah.
Technically, that includes Solomon.
Yeah.
Technically. If
Yeah,
we're
that's
going
right.
to extrapolate this to the whole lineage, right? Where we were talking about why would Solomon be buried where he's buried, It says when your days are fulfilled, you will rest with your ancestors, your
Right.
fathers. So technically, if Yahuwah meant that to also be for his whole seed,
Mm-hmm.
that would include Solomon. So to answer Sister Marissa's
Yeah,
question,
that's a good point.
that if you extrapolate that to the overall Davidic covenant that he makes later on, it could be. I'm not saying I know this for a fact. I'm just saying this seems to allude
I
to
don't
that.
think that part is for his whole seed, because there are definitely
Okay.
kings that weren't buried with
Okay.
David.
Yeah,
All
that's true. There were.
I will establish. Here we go. I will establish his throne of his kingdom forever. Still has to be fulfilled in the millennial. Yahusha came through the root, the stem of Jesse. Okay, so he's going to fulfill that in the millennial. And he shall be my son if he commits lawlessness. I will chasten him with the rod of men and with the blows of the sons of men. But my mercy shall not depart from him. As I took it from Shaul, whom I removed from you, and your house and your kingdom shall be established forever before you. Your throne shall be established forever and ever. So this is what Brother Yahusha was talking about. It says, my mercy will never be removed from him. And that's a big deal. That's a big promise. That means no matter how many times he messes up, and this is what do I talk about all the time? Equality is not in Scripture.
That's right.
Yahuwah chooses who he has mercy on. He doesn't give it to everyone. Okay. And I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, that's mean, yada, yada, yada. Listen, he makes the rules. He's the creator. He makes the rules.
Right.
I would also say that has to mean that he repented through Yahweh moving upon him to repent, because Yahweh in his character is not going to allow an unrepentant, wicked, evil person into his kingdom. So I would say that if his mercy's not going to be removed, then
that's right.
More than likely he brought him to a place well, not more than likely. I would say he did bring him to a place of repentance. Yeah. If you want to keep with the whole character of Yahweh.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
That is true. Yep.
Yeah. So let me see, going back to this Davidic covenant link here. So you also have other places that it talks about it. 2 Chronicles 21:7, Psalms 89, 3-4, verse 36 of Psalms 89, 2 Chronicles 7:18, Psalms 89, 3-4. Again, they mentioned Jeremiah 33:17 is the most famous one that talks about forever. I have a covenant with David forever.
Yeah.
So, and again, this is where we get the idea that, there always has to be someone sitting on his throne. I personally believe, like I said, I've mentioned time and time again, I believe Yahusha took over that covenant.
Yes.
So how do I reconcile Jeremiah 33:17 with Genesis 49:10? Well, Yahusha came through the lineage of Judah, of David. When he comes back, he's going to be sitting on that throne. So he takes over the fulfillment of that prophecy because he went through Judah. He physically took on Judean flesh of the house of David. Henceforth, he does. And this is a whole nother topic for a whole nother time. Does that mean he has to return as a human? No, it doesn't necessarily mean that. It just means that there would always be a king sitting on the throne of the house of Israel. It does not mean that he has to become what he was before he was impaled. So I know that's a whole nother big topic, but no, I don't think that necessarily means he has to be a human again. He could possibly be his pre-incarnate form on Earth, that he's described as in Revelations 3,
Right.
and be able to reign on the throne. So
Yes.
that's just my personal opinion on the matter. I don't think it's necessary for him to have to take on human flesh again in the millennium. But anyway, and then it talks about the major issues of the Davidic covenant. This is a really good link here. It talks about Luke 1:31 and 33, Acts 2:30, Isaiah 9:7. So this is a really, really decent link here. This gives you all the fulfillments here that Yahusha fulfills in it. Distinctiveness of the throne of Daud. This is really good. Surprisingly, I wonder if this is like a Messianic Jewish link, because they got like certain ads on here. Yeah, I'm assuming that. So it's called IsraelMyGlory.org article Davidic Covenant. So this is a really good one. I'll probably leave this in with our study today so you guys can check it out for yourselves. It's a really good one. Because it gives you all of the cross references we were looking at here. So Zechariah 14:4-9 they mentioned for the millennial. Okay, you got his second coming and destroys the armies and rulers of all the Gentiles. Revelation 16:12-16, 19 verse 11 all the way to 20 verse 6. So there's a lot of good stuff in here. A lot of tube stuff in here. According to Psalms 110:1-2, the Messiah is to sit at the right hand of his Father in heaven until it's time for him to rule. Thus, the Messiah's rule as king will not begin until after his present session with the Father in heaven. So he's talking about his ascension. It cannot happen until after he ascends back to the Father. Obviously, we know that. Yahusha stated that he would sit on the throne of his esteem as the Son of Man when the earth is regenerated. Matthew 19:28, Romans 8:18-22. Peter indicated. So I think that's about it. Is that a new hand, bro, or
No,
okay. Okay, just checking.
no,
I don't
same
think
hand I was born with.
I'm trying to think, is there anything from 11 we didn't touch on? Fly. Okay, so you got the Edomites being mentioned. He married an Edomite woman, Syrian, Ammonite, Hittite, Amorite. Wow. Moabite. Okay, yeah, that's one of the major issues, like I was saying before, was not just him multiplying the women, but him, like, every woman he had was a pagan. Egyptian woman, Moabite, Ammonite, Syrian, Edomite, Hittite, Amorite. So it seems like not any of his wives were Hebrew, from what it would seem like. Or they're not mentioned if he did. So that's the biggest problem here is you got heathen pagan women influencing you. It would be like what happened with Adam and Kua in the garden, times that by 100. And that's what he was dealing with. So, that's how bad it was, because he didn't just have one woman being deceived by Satan. He had every single wife of his following the direction of Satan. So you got to realize, like, that's like one man having all these women that are pagan women worshiping pagan gods, being allowed to worship pagan gods in the land. He's even building houses for them so they can worship their pagan gods in their own houses. That was the issue. So I know a lot of people will always use this for like to argue against polygamy. A lot of Christians like to do that, not looking at the context. The context is pagan women. It's talking about women not in covenant with Yahuwah, that don't worship Yahuwah, that don't worship Yahusha, are influencing him. They're probably saying, because I've dealt with this all my life, I could picture it. Oh, don't you love me? You should make an altar for me. Don't you? I'm telling you, this is how stuff like that happens. You don't love me because you do this for one wife. Because once he did it for the Egyptian wife, he had to do it for every single wife. And, it's just a bad, 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 bad situation. Go ahead, Sister Marissa.
So I don't know if we've talked about this before, but didn't we say that some of them were actually Hebrew, like the Amorites, or like they came from the descendants of the Hebrews?
There's an argument for Syrian, that the Syrians, depending on what verse you look at in the Torah, it sometimes defines Mesopotamia as Syria. So technically, you could have Shemites from there. I don't know if they would be of Abraham's lineage, though. There was other Shemites that Assyria became known as from the original Ashur, who was a Shemite, but he's not of actually Abraham. They're Shemites, but they're not of Abraham. So technically, yes, they're Shemite lineage if you talk about the Syrians or the Assyrians technically. But that I don't know at this point whether they would be purely from the person Ashur of Genesis 10. I don't know if they would have been purely from him. It would have been probably mixed at that point. But the other ones, no. Moabites, Moab, Ammonite, Ammon. See, Ammon's another one that's Shemite, but not really Abrahamic. They're another one.
Moabites, isn't the Moabites come from Esau?
No, Lot. They come from Lot. So like Abraham's what is his brother-in-law?
Oh yeah. Okay, Lot's daughters.
His nephew. So they're in-laws to the Israelites, but they're not actually Israelite. They're the Moabites and the Ammonites would have been like their cousins or whatever, but they're not. They're still considered Gentile lineage.
Esau
They're-
Should they be considered Hebrews because Abraham, Hebrew, right? And Lot was his nephew.
Yeah, Lot wasn't part of that covenant though. Like without being grafted in, they would not be considered Hebrews. The Ammonites and the Moabites, they are Gentiles because they come from Lot, and Lot was not originally in covenant with Yahuwah. As far as we know, he wasn't. Abraham was, if I'm not mistaken. Like obviously Abraham was. He's the father of the Israelites, but Lot really wasn't. He was like,
Lot knew Torah because Abraham taught him, and Lot was one of the descendants of Abraham that the father saved from.
Well, no. He's not a descendant of Abraham. He's a nephew. He's not a descendant. He's a in-law to Abraham. He's not like he's basically Abraham was his uncle. He wasn't a descendant of Abraham. So he was a fellow relative, you could say, of Abraham, but not a descendant. So that covenant to Abraham is to his descendants, not to his family members. For example, the Abrahamic covenant, the original Abrahamic covenant did not include Terah. It did not include any of Abraham's family that he left behind. So Lot was doing his own thing. He was, he knew of Torah, but there's no indication in Genesis that he worshipped Yahuwah, that he said, you're the great creator and I worship you. Like he knew who Yahuwah was through those angels, but he didn't it was kind of like a Cyrus deal, like King Cyrus, like he knew who Yahuwah was, or Darius of Persia, same type of thing. But there's no indication that that Lot would have been part of that Abrahamic covenant. He was that covenant is solely, when it was first given, was given to Abraham and his seed, his physical seed that came from his loins. Lot did not come from his loins. Lot is his nephew. He didn't. So it like, to explain, it would be like for example, Ham, right? Ham is Shem's brother, but the Abrahamic covenant goes through Shem through Abraham. So Ham doesn't have anything to do with that covenant. So you could be
confusing, Mark, because Lot is
Yeah.
family to him.
Yeah.
Not only that, he was the only one that was saved out of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah, he was saved from there. And then his daughters, actually, if you want to think about it, the Ammonites that come from Moabites that come from him are bastard children. They could not enter Yahuwah's assembly for a certain generation. They even grafted in wise. They were considered out of covenant, and they could not be grafted in until a certain amount of generations because they were bastard children. The Moabites come from Lot's daughters who raped him. They basically raped him and then got pregnant. So you have the Moabites and the Ammonites are from those daughters. So those daughters basically committed a raping incest with their dad, their drunken dad, and then had the Moabites and the Ammonites through the two daughters. So, but as far as Scripture is concerned, Yahuwah is concerned, they're not of that Abrahamic covenant. They're outsiders. They have to be grafted in, just like all the rest of the Gentiles. They have to be grafted in. So even Ishmael, here's another example, right? Ishmael's a son of Abraham, right? The covenant was not for Ishmael. The covenant was for Isaac.
Right.
Yahuwah even says, in Isaac is your seed. So Ishmael, being a direct son of Abraham, is not included in that Abrahamic covenant. So yeah, it does get a little confusing. I know what you're saying. It does get a little confusing, but what you got to understand is that Abrahamic covenant, physically and spiritually, goes only through Abraham's seed. And so the only way to be Abraham's seed, obviously we know in the new covenant, is faith in Messiah to be grafted in.
Yeah.
And even the natural branches, they still have to be grafted in. So, but initially it was Abraham's physical lineage. That was it. And then if you wanted to be in a part of that promise, you had to be grafted in. If you're not part of Abraham's line through Isaac. See, the key distinction is it's through Isaac, not Ishmael. And Paul talks about this in Galatians, by the way. He talks about this, how because Ishmael was not the child of the promise, he was a child of works, of Abraham's own works, because he slept with Hagar and got Ishmael. So Yahuwah was not promising his seed through a slave woman. You know what I'm saying? That's what that's kind of the whole point of right, Mom, of the Galatians chapter.
Yeah, that's right.
Like the promise versus works and all that. That's faith versus works. He's trying to allegorize it with Ishmael and Isaac. That Isaac is the child of faith. Ishmael's the child of Abraham's own physical works, because he didn't trust Yahuwah. He had no faith initially that Yahuwah was going to give him a son, right? So he went out and did it in his own way, child of works. So I really recommend people that are having a hard time understand this, like read that Galatians chapter in the context of what we're talking about, and you'll understand what I'm saying. So basically, Ishmael, just like the Moabites, just like the Ammonites, they could be related to Abraham and not be of that covenant. You can be related to him. And the Assyrians, technically, originally, I'm saying the original Assyrians were Shemites, supposedly, because you had Ashur, who was a descendant of Shem, that supposedly founded Assyria. So that's where that theory comes from. If you go to Genesis 10, it will say, Ashur was talks about Shem's descendants, just to show you guys real quick what I'm talking about here. So you go to Shem's descendants here, And so there, Shem himself, verse 21 here of Genesis 10 says, he had children born to him. He was the father of the sons of Eber, the brother of Japheth the elder. The sons of Shem, Elam, and Asher, which is commonly translated as Assyria, and Arphaxad, Lud, Aram, and Canaan. So all these guys are descendants of Shem. So Asher became known as Assyria. And then later on in scripture, Nimrod takes the mantle of the name Asher in prophecy. So this original Asher guy, we don't know what the heck happened to him. Because after Genesis 10, he just disappears. We don't know what happened to him. We do find out later on, though, in this chapter, I should say earlier on in this chapter, you have Nimrod coming about, and then all of a sudden it says, Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a giant and a giant hunter. His kingdom was Babylon, the beginning of his kingdom, Erech, Akkad, Calneh in the land of Shinar. Out of that land came Ashur, or Syria, and built Nineveh and the city Rehoboth, or Calais. So something happened with this guy, Ashur, that, it seems like either Nimrod somehow took over the land of Ashur or something happened there, because that guy Ashur is never mentioned again. He's like non-existent after Genesis 10. So but the claim is that I started looking into this whole thing about who would have been in control of Egypt at the time of the Exodus, and there are claims that the Hyksos, which are Shemites, somehow would have took over. But I think where the confusion is that most of the people that debunk it try to say that the Hyksos are the Israelites, which I would disagree. I believe the Hyksos were Assyrians, were Shemite Assyrians that came from Ashur and somehow took over. And so that's where some of us, like me, that believe that there was a Assyrian pharaoh, that's where we get the idea from. From that, and from the fact that it says the word another in the Septuagint can mean another kind, like of another lineage. So, but there's like all these type of like theories about the Hyksos and this other Shemite group that it seems like they forcefully took over the land of Egypt around the time of Masha. And there's this verse, because a lot of people will say to me, well, the Assyrian thing, that didn't happen until the time of Sennacherib. The problem I have with this is that this is a reference, in my opinion, to the Exodus, is Isaiah 52:4. It says here, thus says Yahuwah, my people went down before, meaning not this time period, before, to Egypt to sojourn there, and were carried away forcibly to the Assyrians. So at some point in time in history, the Assyrians had control of Egypt, or at least were in Egypt. So that's one of the reasons I believe that the Pharaoh of the Exodus was actually an Assyrian. Mainly because that verse is talking about when his people went down to sojourn there. I know a lot of people will say, well, they went back to Egypt, around the time of the Babylonian captivity. The problem I have with that, though, is the Assyrians were not in Egypt. Mom, was there at any point in the book of Ezekiel or anything, does Yahuwah use Assyria to bring them back to the land?
I don't think so.
No. So to me, the timeline just doesn't add up in my personal.
There is definitely a time where they were brought back into Egypt. I'm not exactly sure when it was, but it does show it I think in Josephus' history. The only issue is that certain lands that they were brought back to Egypt with were never on ships.
Yeah.
It was always by land that they were brought back into Egypt.
Yeah. And this event here is saying when they of themselves went to Egypt, it says that they went down before to sojourn there, to live there. and were carried away forcibly to the Assyrians. So it's almost talking about them being enslaved to the Assyrians. Now, as far as I know, the only time they went down to Egypt and were enslaved is Exodus. I'm just saying, it's the only time I can think of it. So I know a lot of people will say this is talking about Sennacherib, but to me, it doesn't fit. It just, Isaiah 52:4 does not fit the Isaiah's time period, in my opinion. I don't see it. I just don't, So that's fine if people want to disagree, but as far as I can see, there's something missing in the Exodus story that we've kind of overlooked is this Assyrian Shemite connection. And the Hyksos, I think the secularists, they call them the Hyksos dynasty or whatever. Supposedly was a Shemite people that were very barbaric and very different from the Israelites. A lot of modern scholars want to equate them with the Israelites and want to say that the Egyptians were just trying to, paint the Israelites in a bad way. I don't think the Hyksos were the Israelites at all. That's just my opinion. I think they were descendants of this Ashur guy of Genesis 10. That's what I think actually happened, because it seems like he's the original Assyrian, and Nimrod, somewhere along the lines, maybe took over the land of Assyria, went into Assyria and actually defeated this guy and took his name, and became known as the Assyrian. That's why you see in Micah 5, it says the land of Nimrod, Assyria, the land of Nimrod. So there's something lost in history that they're not telling us about that. But anyway, let me see if I can find it. I remember looking this up the other day. Hyksos. I want to see if I can find this again. There's a legitimate source here to 1650 BC. Yeah, this is the closest I came to any proof of this. Is an article on Reddit. Hyksos were the real Assyrians, not the Assyro-Chaldeans. My theory. Genetic evidence points to the predominance of the haplotype among the shepherd kings who usurped Egypt and many nations in the region, like how the Mitanni usurped the Hittites and later Egypt. The Hyksos were believed to be the shepherds and skilled in horsemanship, allowing them to travel vast distances in short periods of time. Assyrian lists of kings record the name Hayanu for a remote ancestor of Shamshi Adad, 1800 BC of Assyria. I would disagree with the dating. I doubt that the creation's that old, but Kayan being a Hyksos king, I am of the belief that the shepherd's horses was traveling along with Aryans, cattle, agriculturalists, slow movers. So this guy gives some links he has. He believes, according to the DNA research, that the original Assyrians, not the modern Chaldean Babylonian Assyrians that came later on, but he believes the original Assyrians were the Hyksos people. And so that's what I started looking into, just trying to entertain that theory, because looking at stuff like Exodus 1:8, I think it says another king. When you look at the word another, it means, of another kind, and all that stuff. There's little hints in scripture that it seems like the Egyptians might have not been in control of Egypt in Moshe's time, that something happened between the time of the Egypt of Joseph's time and Moshe's time, like that gap, something happened. So that's kind of the theory that I'm slowly starting to agree with from this guy, that the original Assyrians were actually Shemites, and that they were a separate lineage of Shem from the Israelites. And where it gets confused is people think that The Egyptians of today, I guess, try to portray the Hyksos people as Israelites or whatever, which definitely doesn't fit the narrative at all. But they're so I think that's what gets the confusing part of it. But I'm of the opinion that something happened, that there was some type of takeover in Egypt for this new pharaoh all of a sudden to not know Joseph, not know the Israelites, not really to look at them favorably. Um, you know, to me, it just doesn't add up. All of a sudden, they're afraid of the Israelites because they're too numerous, and that's it. And there's no like nothing else added to the story. Like there's no prior animosity or whatever. To me, it would seem very strange that all of a sudden they're scared if it's the same people in control of Egypt. It's just I don't know. There's something with that story that I believe the Assyrian thing. I can't prove it, but I believe that it's a possibility. It's a theory. It's a possibility that would make sense to me. That that's why you have this another king who's of a different kind, of a different lineage, of a different genealogy than the king that knew Joseph. So, but anyway, that's just a theory I have. So I think that's about it for today, guys. If I hope everyone out there loved this study and got some edification out of it. Yahuwah willing, we'll be back next week. And Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat shalom.
Have a great week. Have a great rest of Yahuwah.